Mom looked at me and said, "You'll never amount to anything." My brother laughed and called me a joke. I said nothing. A year later they showed up at my office and, you know how some moments don't echo until years later? That day in the kitchen, the air stale with silence after Mom said it, felt like nothing more than another small humiliation. "You'll never amount to anything," she said flatly, as if stating the weather. My brother, Darren, didn't even wait for her to finish. He barked a laugh, loud, ugly. "What a joke!" he snorted. "You? Seriously?" I didn't reply. That was my talent back then, swallowing every sharp word, letting them echo in the hollows of my chest until they lost their sting. But this time, something lodged deeper. Not pain exactly, more like purpose. Like someone struck a match and tossed it into a dry field. I remember standing there, staring at the chipped tile on the floor, committing every word to memory. Not out of spite. Out of necessity. Because if I was ever going to crawl out of that house, those insults would be my rope. They didn't know what I had been building, quietly, invisibly. Every night after my job washing dishes at Delaney's diner, I'd go home, open my cracked laptop, and work on a startup idea I'd been nursing for months. I didn't tell them. I barely told myself. I just built. So when I packed my things a month later and left that suffocating little house with its peeling paint and louder ghosts, I didn't slam the door. I didn't make a speech. I didn't look back. I left like I existed, quietly. But I was on fire. I moved into a basement apartment that smelled like damp laundry and broken dreams. The windows were half-bricked, and the radiator made noises like it was dying a slow, bitter death. But it was mine. Every day was a blur of motion. I worked 2 jobs to cover rent and ramen, warehouse loader by day, food delivery by night. The real work, though, happened between 11 p.m. and 4 a.m. That's when I built. The idea wasn't flashy. No revolutionary app, no sexy social network. It was simple, logistics optimization for small vendors, helping them cut costs and streamline inventory. I'd seen how bad systems ruined businesses when I worked the dish pit at Delaney's. Every missed order, every delay, it was money leaking out of cracked foundations. The first few clients were kind strangers from online forums. Then came referrals. I reinvested every cent. No parties, no new clothes, not even a new phone. Just software, servers, coffee, and a vision. 12 months. That's all it took. 12 months of relentless work, of code written under flickering bulbs, of sleeping in 4-hour chunks and waking with a new fire in my gut. By the time the leaves turned again, I had an office. Not a cubicle, a corner. Glass walls. My company logo etched onto the door. Employees. Investors. Real revenue. And a new version of me. I wasn't the joke anymore. They didn't know that yet. But they would. The morning they arrived, I was reviewing quarterly projections with my head of strategy. The office smelled like fresh leather and roasted espresso, 2 indulgences I allowed myself once success had a name. I had just signed off on a new partnership deal when my assistant knocked softly. "There's a woman and a man here, no appointment. They're asking to speak with someone in acquisitions." She hesitated. "I think you'll want to see them." I stood slowly. Through the frosted glass, I could already make out the silhouettes. My stomach didn't clench. My hands didn't shake. That surprised me. I opened the door, and there they were, Mom, with a look that tried to be proud but crumbled at the corners, and Darren, whose arrogance had collapsed into a nervous twitch. They didn't recognize me at first. I stepped aside. "Come in." They walked in like they were entering a courtroom, clutching hope like it might shatter. My office was minimalist but intimidating, clean lines, high ceilings, a view that stretched like the future I'd built for myself. They sat. I didn't. "So," I began, voice calm, "what brings you here?" Mom glanced at Darren, who cleared his throat. We're trying to pitch a proposal. We heard your firm funds local initiatives. Our home's in foreclosure," Mom said softly, folding her hands like in prayer. "Darren lost his job last month. We're desperate." Still, They didn't recognize me. Not the version of me that wore custom suits and spoke with clipped confidence. They just saw a gatekeeper. A potential handout. I leaned back in my chair, fingers steepled. Tell me more, I said, because I wanted to hear them ask. Darren did most of the talking. Funny, how the loudest in youth often become the most pitiful in silence. He stumbled through a half-baked pitch about a property they wanted to save, a business they could start if only someone would believe in them. I nodded slowly, playing the part. So you're looking for funding? Mom jumped in. We just need a chance. Just someone to believe in us. I studied them for a long moment. They looked tired. Not just physically, something deeper. Like years of being the people they were had finally caught up with them. Then I stood, walked to the window, and looked out over the city. The one they said I'd never reach. You don't recognize me, do you? Silence. I turned. Mom's brow furrowed. Darren blinked. I'm sorry? You once said I'd never amount to anything, I said quietly. You, I pointed at Darren, called me a joke. Laughed while I stood in our kitchen. Mom's mouth parted. Darren's eyes widened. Wait. You always saw me as a burden. Background noise. The one who wouldn't make it. I stepped closer. But I did. Recognition bloomed on their faces like bruises. It was almost beautiful to watch. This is your company? Darren's voice cracked. I nodded once. Mom looked like she might faint. I didn't come here for revenge, I said, voice even. But you did come here for mercy. From the man you mocked. And then I let them sit in that silence. The kind that says more than words ever could. Darren opened his mouth to speak, some half-apology dying in his throat, but I raised a hand. Don't, I said. Don't ruin the moment with excuses. I circled behind my desk slowly, deliberately, like a judge returning to the bench. My office, my rules. You know, I said, settling into my chair. I remember every word. Not just that day in the kitchen either. The years before. Every eye roll, every time you looked through me, laughed at me, talked about me like I was a stain on your picture-perfect life. Mom looked down at her hands, wringing them like they could undo time. We didn't mean. You meant every word. I cut in. And that's fine. Really. Because it taught me something. I stopped waiting for approval the day I realized I'd never get it. They were both quiet now, finally understanding they weren't here for a handout. They were here for a reckoning. While you mocked me, I continued, I learned. I failed quietly. Worked silently. Built relentlessly. You thought silence meant weakness. It didn't. It meant focus. I stood again, walked to the cabinet, and pulled out a folder, thin, impersonal, labeled with a project code they didn't recognize. I placed it on the table between them. This, I said, is a rejection letter. For the proposal you submitted. It was declined yesterday by our internal review team. I brought you in today for context. Not a second chance. Darren looked like he'd been slapped. Mom reached for the folder with shaking fingers. There must be something we can. There's not. I let the words hang there. Then I leaned in slightly. Because mercy without accountability is just permission. Darren's jaw clenched. So that's it? You're punishing us? No, I said, straightening. I'm showing you what it looks like when the joke writes the punchline. I watched them stand slowly, as if gravity had suddenly gotten heavier. Darren looked pale. Mom looked older than I'd ever seen her. I hope, I said as they turned to leave, you find your way. Truly. But not on my dime. The door shut softly behind them. I sat back down. And smiled. The office was still echoing with the sound of that door closing when my phone buzzed. I let it ring. I needed a minute. I looked out over the skyline again. Same city, different view. Below those towering glass buildings were the streets I used to walk with holes in my shoes. I remembered a winter night standing in front of a closed bakery, counting quarters to afford a bus ride home, hands frozen and empty. That was the night I decided I would never ask anyone for anything again. Especially not them. Back then, I used to think family was something you had to earn. That maybe if I worked harder, smiled more, stayed quieter, they'd see me, really see me. But they never did. Not until they needed something. And now? Now I was the one with the locked doors. I poured a glass of water from the bar behind my desk. No champagne. No victory toast. Just quiet satisfaction. Power doesn't scream. It whispers. I remembered how, after I moved out, Darren used to send me text messages now and then, not to check in, but to show off. A picture of his new car. A smug comment about his real job. Mom would call on holidays, mostly out of guilt. Or boredom. Those calls had stopped once the company got mentioned in the news. Once I got mentioned. They didn't want me until I became useful. I sat back in my chair and thought about the irony. Darren, the golden boy, laid off and desperate. Mom, who used to say my quietness would get me nowhere, now practically whispering for help. They taught me I wasn't enough. They built me for solitude, for survival. I just used the lessons better than they expected. And it wasn't just about the money. It was about space. Ownership. That office was mine. The walls, the air, the authority. Every inch built by the boy they left behind. I'd thought of dozens of ways this moment could play out. Rehearsed lines, dramatic scenes, maybe even a little cruelty. But standing there, looking into their eyes small and pleading, I didn't need theatrics. The truth was enough. I didn't want revenge. I wanted distance. I thought that would be the end of it. The scene closed, curtain drawn, the story sealed like a box never to be reopened. But the past has a way of coming back when it senses an unlocked window. 3 days later, my assistant buzzed me. "There's a woman in the lobby again," she said. "She won't leave unless she speaks to you. She says she's your mother." I closed my laptop slowly. "I'll come down," I said. The lobby was glass and steel, clean, sharp, modern. She looked like she didn't belong there, and maybe that was the point. Mom stood in front of the marble receptionist's desk, clutching a cheap full-leather purse like it was armor. Her eyes lit up when she saw me, and for a second, just a second, I saw something soft, maybe even real. But I didn't let that fool me. "Why are you here?" I asked, not unkindly, but flat. "I needed to say something," she said. "Can we just sit?" We took 2 seats by the window. She looked tired. She always wore disappointment like perfume, but now it seemed heavier. Like she was suffocating in it. "I wasn't a good mother," she began. "I know that." I didn't say anything. "I didn't protect you from Darren," she continued. "Or from my own words. I told you you'd never amount to anything, and I see now. I was wrong." Still, I said nothing. She reached into her purse and pulled out a folded photograph. "I found this last week," she said, placing it on the table between us. It was me, maybe 12 years old, standing in front of the old garage where I used to tinker with broken electronics. My hands were greasy, my face a mix of joy and curiosity. "You were always building something," she said softly. "I never understood it. And I think that scared me." Now I looked at her. All I knew was survival. Not dreaming. "You reminded me of your father, and that was hard. Loving him cost me everything. So I closed off. And then I made you pay for it." I felt something shift inside me, nothing dramatic, more like the soft click of a door unlocking. "I don't expect forgiveness," she said. "But I wanted you to know that I'm proud of you. Even if I didn't help you get there." I leaned back in my chair. I didn't have the words. I wasn't ready to say, "It's okay." Because it wasn't. But I could say this. I built my life with no blueprint. No tools. Just memory and spite and hope. And while I can accept what you said, I'm not going to pretend that we're suddenly family again. She nodded, slowly. "I understand." We sat in silence for a few more moments. Then she stood. "Goodbye, Marcus," she said, using my name like it belonged to someone she almost remembered. "Goodbye," I said, watching her walk toward the glass doors. I stayed seated for a while, staring at the photo. At the boy with grease on his hands and 1,000 plans in his head. That kid didn't know what was coming. But he built something out of it anyway. After Mom left, something shifted in me, not forgiveness, exactly, but a loosening. Like I'd been holding my breath for years and finally exhaled. That evening, I walked through my office alone. The floor was empty, lit by the soft hum of nighttime sensors. Most CEOs would have gone home, but I stayed late by design. Success hadn't changed that part of me. I still found comfort in solitude, in the quiet click of elevator doors and the faint glow of city lights outside the glass. I paused by the long wall where we'd hung a visual timeline of our growth, from handwritten notes and basic mock-ups to sleek product launches and milestone partnerships. In the center, a photo of our first cramped office, where the paint peeled and the AC rattled like an old truck engine. That office had been the beginning, and every time I passed the photo, I reminded myself of how little I had, and how much I had built. I sat at my desk and pulled out the old leather-bound notebook I kept locked in the bottom drawer. The first page was a list, one I'd written the week I moved out of that house. It wasn't goals or affirmations. Just names. Darren. Mom. A few teachers. One boss. All the people who had looked at me and seen nothing. Each name had a date next to it. The last time they doubted me. I told myself I'd cross off each name when I reached the place they thought I never would. There was only one name left unmarked, Darren. He hadn't come back, not in person. But 2 days after Mom visited, I received an envelope from a law firm. Inside, a bankruptcy filing. Darren had declared Chapter 13. Attached was a personal letter, typed and signed, but obviously him. If there's any chance for a loan, I'll pay it back. Just need a little help to get on my feet. No apologies. No ownership. Just desperation wrapped in entitlement. I read it twice, then slid it into the shredder without a word. Because what Darren never understood, what none of them did, was that I didn't build this life to prove them wrong. I built it so I'd never have to need them. Ever. That was the real victory. It wasn't the glass office or the sleek car parked downstairs. It was the freedom to choose who stayed in my life. And who didn't. A week later, I received another unannounced visitor, but this time, it wasn't my mother. It was Darren. He didn't wait at the front desk. Somehow, he made it past the lobby, past security, up the elevator, and into the hallway outside my office before my assistant intercepted him. I only noticed because of the commotion, raised voices, a guard trying to hold him back. I just want 5 minutes, he was saying. He's my brother. Tell him I'm here. I stood up slowly, walked to the doorway, and looked him over. His suit was wrinkled. The bags under his eyes weren't from lost sleep, they were from lost years. He looked small in a way I hadn't remembered. Smaller than he'd ever made me feel. I nodded to my assistant. It's fine. Let him in. Darren stepped in, unsure. His eyes flicked around the office like he didn't know where to sit. I didn't offer. I wasn't going to come, he said. But I didn't know what else to do. That much is clear. He rubbed a hand over his face. I lost the job. Then the apartment. Then, I lost everything. I waited. I know you don't owe me anything. And I know I've never made it easy. But I'm not here to grovel. I just want a second chance. He looked at me then, really looked. Not through me. Not past me. At me. You did it, he said, voice quiet. You proved us all wrong. It should have felt good. I'd imagined that moment 1,000 times, played it out in my head during those long nights coding on a broken keyboard in that freezing basement apartment. But now that it was here, it didn't feel like victory. It felt hollow. I didn't do it to prove you wrong, I said. I did it because I had no one left to believe in me but me. He nodded, slowly. I get that now. A long silence stretched between us. Then he spoke again. I don't want your money, he said. I just want a job. That caught me off guard. You want to work for me? He nodded. Anything. Entry level. Custodial, clerical, I don't care. I want to do something that matters. That was the first time I'd ever heard sincerity in his voice. I didn't answer right away. I walked around my desk, leaned against the edge, and folded my arms. You remember when you called me a joke? His face tightened. Yeah. And you laughed. I remember. Do you remember what Mom said? He looked at the floor. Yeah. I watched him for a moment longer. Then I walked to the corner of the office, opened a cabinet, and pulled out a manila envelope. Inside was a contract, an offer for a 12-week probationary role in our logistics unit. Base pay. Hard work. No shortcuts. I held it out. This isn't forgiveness, I said. It's a test. You show up early. You stay late. You start from the bottom. He reached for it cautiously. And Darren? Yeah? If you're late once, if you quit halfway through, you're done. No second chances. He nodded quickly, gripping the envelope like it was oxygen. Understood. He turned and left without another word. And as the door clicked shut behind him, I let out a long breath. Because maybe this wasn't the ending I wanted. But it was the ending I needed. Darren showed up the next Monday. He didn't wear a suit. He wore the company polo and stood quietly at orientation like every other new hire. He listened. He took notes. He answered questions when asked and kept his head down. He never asked for favors. Never mentioned we were related. I watched from a distance, and I saw something I never expected from him: effort. Weeks passed. Then months. He stuck it out. He worked harder than I ever thought he could. It wasn't about talent. He had some, sure, but he had never known humility. That was what made the difference now. It was the first time in his life I'd seen him build something with his own hands. And maybe that's what redemption really is, not an apology, but a pattern. As for Mom, she didn't come back again. But she did send a letter, real paper, handwritten, the loops in her cursive tight with hesitation. She said she was getting help. That she was trying to unlearn who she became after Dad died. She didn't ask to see me. Just wrote, "I hope you're okay. I'm finally trying to be." I never responded. But I kept the letter. Some wounds don't close with a conversation. Some stay open, because they shape you more than they hurt you. I don't forgive easily, not because I can't, but because some people must live with the weight of who they were, just like I lived with the memory of it. Still, I moved on. My company grew. I hired more people, young, hungry, often overlooked. The kind I used to be. I kept my door open. Not just because I wanted to be approachable, but because I never wanted to forget what it felt like to have every door closed. Sometimes I caught Darren glancing at me across the office. There was respect in his eyes now, not fear, not envy. Just understanding. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. He knew who I was now. And I knew I had become something greater than they ever imagined. The man they once called a joke? He wrote the punchline. And he's still writing.